Welcome to another episode of Million Dollar Stories, where we get to interview authors from all over the world. I love talking to authors because they have the courage to take their thoughts, their stories, their lessons, put it down in a book, and share it with the many, ultimately changing their legacy and destiny in the process. And if you're an entrepreneur out there, I highly recommend you write a book. You will obtain self-awareness, clarity, and many opportunities. If you need help with any of that, check out dreamstarterspublishing.com. And if you have a book that's already done, you want to use it to generate leads for your business, check out bookmarketingcrm.com. As you guys know, I am not a parent myself. I look at maybe some of the dogs that I've had, or maybe even the neighbors' dogs, and I treat them as if they're my kids, but I don't have any kids. However, we've worked with many individuals who do, and I think this is going to be such a value add for anybody listening who has kids or is looking to have them. Because there is something that's going on in the world when it comes to parenting. It's different from whenever I grew up. So stay tuned for this podcast episode. The book we're talking about is called The Parent Trap: How to Stop Overloading Parents and Fix Our Inequality Crisis. And we have the author with us today, Nate Hilger. Thanks so much for being here, man.
Thanks so much for inviting me on your podcast, Mike.
Well, let's start off with the genesis of this book. What made you want to write it? What started this whole process? And if you can give us a quick little background on where you come from and what got you to this point, that'd be phenomenal.
Yeah, I grew up in Orange County, California, and I grew up in the 1980s. And Orange County was a really diverse place. It still is. It's a wonderful place, racially, economically. There's people from all walks of life. And I went to a big old public school in Orange County, Fountain Valley High School. We had, I think, over 2,000 kids. There were over 800 kids in my graduating class. And because this community was so diverse, I was fortunate to become close friends with kids who had very different backgrounds and very different, levels of resources and different parenting styles that I got to see at home. That's something I really miss about being a kid, actually, Mike, is, going over to friends' houses and just seeing their entire families. Now, when you meet people at work, you don't go to their home the next weekend and meet their parents. You have a much slower rate of getting to know them personally. Um, but that kind of just got me interested. The differences in what I was seeing at my friends' homes were so like stark that I just found it fascinating. It wasn't that some kid, I didn't have a lot of friends who had, deadbeat parents or were in really crisis situations, fortunately for them. But some kids were getting really advanced tutoring and lots of counseling and lots of private coaching to up their game in soccer or basketball or swimming. Some kids were getting, tons of help from their parents to write their essays or to do their math homework or to just stay on top of their college application complex process. Whereas other kids were pretty much left to their own devices. They were mildly encouraged. They're successful, their efforts to take school seriously and think about their future career weren't discouraged by any means, but they weren't really having their hand held carefully through this whole process. And when I went to college and then graduate school, I'm an economist by background, and I was really curious about this. And I started, the way economists talk about this, they think about intergenerational mobility. Why do some kids who grow up, why is it more likely that if you grow up lower income with parents who don't have college degrees, you are less likely to grow up successful by a very large margin in our country? And I started to study that phenomenon and learn what researchers had to say about it. And the results just seemed so contrary to my idea of America, the aspirations of our country. It became fascinating to me, and I wound up doing a lot of research on that subject. And that personal experience and that interest in the topic motivated me to write this book. And I think another thing I should mention is that the research in this area has transformed over the last 20 years because we've gotten access to much bigger data sets that include both kids and parents and let us really study these issues in new ways.
Wow. And so you took the basic idea of all that, put it in this book, and some of the research is outlined in The Parent Trap. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. A little bit of the research was done by myself, but the vast majority of it was research done by this new wave of economists and sociologists and in some cases political scientists who are really showing that we kind of take for granted that working class kids are not as likely to grow up and go to college or have a good apprenticeship path to a successful career. We kind of just assume that's part of society, and the research is increasingly questioning that and suggesting that if America did make different decisions to help individual parents invest more in their kids' skill development, these programs could be wildly successful and could kind of change the fabric of society and close mostly close a lot of these socioeconomic, well, gaps between rich kids and poor kids in a way that would elevate the poor kids and not drag down the rich kids.
Got it. And so one phrase that I've heard many times from people is that kids will, all right, so they learn by what's caught, not what's taught. I think that's the phrase, how it goes.
Hmm.
So they pay attention to what the parents are doing. So no matter what they say or even what they learn in school, they're basically they're going to mimic whatever they see. And so even if, let's just say, the individual who's broke and is poor and is doing bad things tells their child, don't do drugs. Hey, do this and do that. Don't do what I'm doing. It's not going to sink in. It's always going to be, I guess kind of fall into that maybe biological, subconscious that you are going to pick up on what is around you, the actions, the belief patterns. So, did you notice anything in regards to more is caught than taught? And so, therefore, if you really want to change your family, change your generational or break the generational curses, you have to be the example. You have to invest your money. You have to keep the family together. You have to have certain belief patterns. Rather than just talk about it, you have to do it. Anything you could share about that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the perspective you're sharing is really common, and I haven't heard that phrase. Kids keep what is caught, not taught. Thanks for teaching me about that.
I wish I made it up, but yeah, thank you. That's it's really a great phrase. I've heard it many times
Yeah,
from people like Patrick Bet David and other people I look up to.
cool. One thing I talk about in my book is that today we have a public education system, kindergarten to 12th grade, that is free. And that is one of the biggest innovations America has contributed to the world, is mass access to education. But we've kind of fooled ourselves a little bit, because while this is a wonderful achievement, it covers only a tiny share of childhood opportunity development. Kids, if you look at the hours that kids have to to learn stuff and form valuable friendships and set themselves up for a successful, both just set themselves up for a happy, you know, rich, loving adulthood, more importantly, but also to have a financial, economic freedom, to have a career that is satisfying. All the stuff that kids need to learn to give themselves a good shot at that, they have a certain number of hours to do that from birth to age 18. Public education only covers 10% of those hours. Okay. Because it only starts at age 5. Once it starts, it is only in session about half of all calendar days each year, because we have summer break, winter break, holidays, weekends. And on the 50% of days that it is in session, it only covers about a third of the day. Kids,
Mm.
the free public school ends in most places around 2 o'clock, 1:30, 2:30. So when you say, I think you're making a really good point that parents individually, their role model effects, their choices to invest privately in opportunities for their kids. I do agree with you. Those are the primary determinant of kids' long-term outcomes in our society today. But that is because we have chosen to place a massive burden on individual parents. And there's always going to be a big individual burden on parents. Parents are always going to have to be the most important adults in their kids' lives, generally speaking. I don't advocate changing that or questioning that at all. But imagine if free, high quality education began from birth in the form of subsidies to help all kids go to high quality childcare, you know, home daycare centers, um, more institutional child care centers. This is what rich families do. They spend 15, 20, $30,000 a year to pay for private school before age 5 when public school kicks in. What would it be? Imagine what it would be like if all families had access to that if they chose to take advantage of it. What would it be like if all families had access to the $3,000 or $4,000 summer camps that upper middle class families use to fill those gaps in our public school system, and so on. And so what I want to kind of, you know, chip away at in the perspective you're outlining is that it's kind of our choice to make children's long-term success depend so heavily on the attitudes, investments, resources, and experiences of their own one or two individual parents. It's kind of our choice to make our, generations of children, to make their success and the future success of our country depend on all these individuals' abilities and willingness to make huge personal sacrifices. We could do things a little differently and give kids access. That would give kids access to more role models, a more diverse, it would put their eggs in more baskets, and it would let people who have training and experience and who have chosen to enter a profession of caring for kids deliberately, it would give them more of a role in setting kids up for success. And it would take some of the stress and pain out of parenting, which I think would also help more people decide to have more kids, incidentally.
Yeah. I mean, there are probably some stats that you could share that's pretty scary when it comes to or it depends on where you live. I think it's pretty scary, but most people aren't having kids nowadays. There are stats that show that, I mean, maybe the fear of the future, but maybe the burden of being a parent is definitely increasing cost
Yeah.
wise. It's becoming way more of a business. But also individuals are not getting married, right? And maybe there's a reason for that too. So there's so many stats out there that show a declining birth rate, but also what about the stats of inequality, like you're talking about? In my opinion, the one thing that stands out above everything else is the mental health issues. I think kids
Hmm.
are having depression higher than ever. So when I grew up, I was born in the 80s. I was a 1984 guy. When were you born?
1982.
82. Okay. So I would go to school, and if I was getting bullied, my dad would toughen me up and say, "Hey, you know what? If there are bullies out there, don't let them bother you. You know what I mean? Because sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt you. But when
Yeah.
push comes to shove, you fight back and you be a man." So there
Hmm.
was that aspect, and I think that was very universal in the 80s and 70s, and probably way before that. Nowadays, it's not like that. I don't think that's happening. But also the fact of social media. You throw social media into this, the mix, individuals can't escape. They go to school, and then online bullying and all that. I don't know if we're equipping kids with the ability to kind of have the tools necessary to have the thick skin to kind of like brush it off or to fight back. So, in my opinion, those are two aspects. What stats that have you come across that are super scary, and what do you blame it on?
I share your concern about the increasing problems we're seeing with mental health among kids, especially teenagers, especially teenage girls. And I really like, the work that Jonathan Haidt is doing to bring awareness to smartphones and social media and how hard it is for parents individually to control this. One thing I like in particular about Jonathan Haidt's perspective is that he does share with parents individually that anything you can do to reduce your kids addictive propensities towards these new technologies is really valuable. You got to, but he doesn't really blame parents, because if all their friends are on Instagram and all their friends are on TikTok and they're all looking at it in their classrooms, it's really hard for individual parents to try to take that tool away from their kids. And it's a case like the arguments in my book. I think it's important to keep your eye on what individual parents can do, because parents want to make sacrifices and want to do their best for their kids in most cases. But it's also really important to not place too much weight on this wonderful American ideal of like pure individual responsibility. I love that ideal. I think it's part of what makes our country great, but I think it can distract us from situations where there are coordination problems, and it's really hard for individuals to solve these problems on their own. And there is a really productive potential role for, more collective action through local governments or through even the federal government in some cases. Um, I also want to point out to you there is some questioning now of some of the trends we're seeing in mental health. Some of this stuff might be artifacts of recording, but it doesn't seem like all of it is going to be explained by that. I think the jury is still out about exactly, getting really comparable data over time is a pretty challenging exercise. But yes, I think it is partly a real thing, and we got to address it. I don't have anything to say about your concern about changes in the culture around, fathers and mothers helping their kids stick up for themselves and handle bullying. I actually haven't seen great data on that. I don't know if I do worry that every generation thinks the younger generation is going soft and is becoming less virtuous. You read that in Plato and you read that in Victorian authors, and you read it at all times and all places. So I begin my first reaction to that kind of statement tends to be a little skeptical, but it's possible.
Mental health
Um,
in general, though, I'm looking at a stat here. Maybe this is even just maybe 3 years old. I think it's changed since this, but I'm
yeah.
going to pull it up here. It says approximately 20% of children and adolescents globally experience a mental health disorder. I think it's 1 in 6, age 16 or 6 to 17, experience a mental health disorder. That's
Yes.
crazy. And so
That's crazy.
disorders,
I do worry about some of those things reflecting how we record mental health disorders and how we encourage kids
good
to
point,
and parent.
right? What
And
is a disorder? Who knows,
what
right?
is a
I mean, I
disorder?
used to be depressed as a kid when I used to lose my video games, right? So, like, is that a
Totally.
disorder, right?
Yes. I think it's really hard to those statistics are not simple, and we can't always take them at face value. What I find very convincing and very disturbing are statistics like suicide, but even those you do have some recording issues. It varies over time and place how things are counted as suicide. Um, so I need to since I've learned that some of these statistics have become a little more problematic. I need to dig back in and assess where they're at. I haven't done that yet. Um, but what really bugs me, the statistics that I find most disturbing are that poor kids grow up to have such less successful careers than upper middle class and rich
Mm.
kids. I find that disturbing because it just feels so different from, I don't know what you think about this. To me, that just feels really un-American. I don't know why it's not considered more of a national crisis, and why people aren't, why don't more Americans, a lot of Americans hear that and they think, well, that's because poor parents aren't doing their jobs, or that's because poor kids, just aren't built for the same kinds of success as rich kids. People don't say that out loud. Some of those ideas are a little taboo, but I think a lot of people kind of feel it. I don't know why more people aren't angry about that and insistent that we be searching frantically for policies that address that problem. GDP could, our whole economy could be better. Our whole society could be more secure and safer and more productive. We could have more innovation. We could have safer, communities. Everything gets better when lower income kids and kids whose parents have less education don't have these unnecessary, you know, weaker opportunities that they have today. And those are the statistics that really motivate me to write this book and to stump for this book and to try to argue that we should be making more public investments in our kids so that they can grow up and live the lives that we want them to.
I'm with you. So, yeah, and I think you talk a lot about skill building in your book, right early on in the book. I know that for sure. So let's get to that in a second.
Yes.
But the
Yeah.
way I look at it is, and I grew up, I guess you could say lower middle class I think that's the best way to describe it. And I was able to
What did
build
your
a
what did,
business.
what did your parents do, if you don't mind me asking?
My dad was an HVAC guy, and he would work he'd be a stationary engineer at the airport. So if the
Yep.
heating went out or the cooling went out, he'd go and fix it. And my mom was a
Cool.
stay-at-home mom.
Cool.
So, I mean, if we had something, usually, it was the only one. Whether it was a bicycle or whatever, you had to make sure you close the door for the AC or for the heat. It was always that type of environment. And my dad taught
Yeah.
me about resourcefulness. So even if he didn't make a lot of money, he gave me work ethic and he gave me this ability to take pride in whatever you work on. So, he wasn't wealthy. He didn't have any money, but he did teach me about work ethic. So I think that served me anywhere. However,
Yeah.
what I realized is that school, he couldn't teach me about money because he didn't really make a lot of money. But when I went
Hmm.
to school, they didn't teach me about money either. And when I graduated from college, it took me graduation from college to understand this book called Rich Dad Poor Dad. Have you ever read that book at all?
It's on my list. I've
Yep.
heard it looks like a really fun book. I think somebody did the author go to anyway, yes, it's on my list. I've
Robert
heard great things about it.
Kiyosaki, basically written by a woman named Sharon Lechter, two
Okay.
powerhouses. Anyways, when I read that book, it opened my eyes to wealth building. And then
Oh
I
man, I
realized,
gotta read it.
yep,
I'm gonna read it after this interview.
this will change your life. I'm telling you, this will change it. But when I read that, I was 22 years old and I realized, oh my God, everything that I learned in school is wrong. I know this sounds crazy, but that one book set me free.
Like what? Like what? What did you learn in school that was wrong? What are you talking about?
So when it comes to going to school to get a job, to pay, corporation, to put money into 401k, to buy a house, to do certain things that the average American does.
Yeah.
Wait till the boss gives you a raise, and then when you get that raise, you might do X, Y, and Z with it. And credit cards and taking on credit card debt early on at 18 years old, whenever I first went to college, that was put into our face, and you have no financial literacy. And so
Yeah.
it's just a middle class. It's just the average person, right?
Okay.
Go to college, take on an insane amount of debt, get out of
Hmm.
college, and then you might have 3 months to kind of figure out your life, but you got to get a job to pay off that. But then you need a car so you could take on that. And everything, it just gets crazy, right? And so by the time you're 24 years old, you're usually in serious debt in a job that you
Yeah.
hate and you think you're going to get out of it. Anyways, I read
Okay.
that book.
Yeah.
I'm in debt. I start a business. I finally start to change my life. I read about personal development, nonfiction, business books, all the books that they never gave me in school. And it
Mm.
made me angry. Why the hell did school keep these books from me? Then I
Mm.
start a business about writing books for entrepreneurs. And then I
Mm.
interview multimillionaires and I get into all these rooms with millionaires and billionaires, actually. And I asked them, what are some of the books that changed your life? Oh, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Think and Grow Rich, Outwitting the Devil. And I'm like, wait a second. There's a common theme here. Every millionaire is saying pretty much the same 3 or 4 or 5 books. It's
Mm.
amazing. Why
Wow.
are we not being taught these books in school? And then you start
Mm.
to realize, maybe, what if there's some type of an agenda to keep people away from this information. And so it blew my mind as to why the average person in school is not being taught the right stuff when it comes to wealth building, financial success, and success in general. And so it
Uh-huh.
really pissed me off. And that's why it's
Mm.
my goal to set people free by really giving them the information. That's what this whole podcast is about. So, did you I mean, I bring that book up because I think that one book, put that into the hands of a sixth grader in any public education system, and it's
Yeah.
like a little nut that's going thrown into an engine and it changes their whole life. You know what I mean? It's going to blow up the whole system, right? And
Wow,
that's in a good
I love
way.
the passion, Mike. I love it.
Yeah.
This is awesome.
So,
I can't wait to read this book. What
yes, please
if
let
I
me know
learn
what you
nothing
think of
else
it.
from this book, if I learn nothing else from that book, I probably will learn a lot, but if I learn nothing else, I'll learn how to really inspire my readers, you know. He did
Thank you.
it's a man and a woman who wrote that book together.
Yeah, so it was actually Robert Kiyosaki's idea. He's a brander, he's a marketer, but he needed a great writer, and Sharon Lecter is an amazing writer.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, I'll learn a lot from that book. I want people to read my book and feel the way that you're feeling about that book.
Oh,
Um,
dude, I owe my life to that book. That's why it's behind me. You see it, it's sitting right here.
yeah, I do really like some nonfiction self-help books. One book that a friend recommended to me when I was doing research and working on the book as well was the War of Art. Great
Oh,
self-help
great
book.
book. Great book. All
Yeah,
right.
yeah. Um, I don't. So where let's see. Um,
And just
what
to
was your
touch on that,
question?
yeah, so the question is, that one book to me will change the life of any student. They'll realize what an asset is, what a liability is, how to go from
Yeah,
one quadrant to the next. In my opinion, that's a quick fix, right? So do
yeah.
you
So
believe there's some
okay.
type of agenda to keep kids from the real information?
Oh, I love your question. No, I don't. I don't think it's a quick fix, and I don't think there's an agenda to keep kids from the real information. I don't think there's anybody smart enough in charge to orchestrate such a wildly sophisticated conspiracy. Um,
Wait a
I
second.
wish.
Wait a second. Before I go into that,
Yeah.
have you looked into how the education system was created? Have you done any research on Rockefeller and changing the world with his what he did in 19, what was it, 15, 1920, somewhere in there?
What? No. What's the Rockefeller? I have read a lot about the history of the American education system, but I don't know the. I'm not sure I know the Rockefeller
Okay,
story you're
so
talking about. Teach
Rockefeller.
me.
Give me your
Yeah.
thoughts on him, just your overall thoughts of Rockefeller.
Oh, I haven't read a biography of him, but I start from the perspective that anybody who makes that much money is not to be trusted in my personal life.
Okay, so do you know
Yeah.
that he's responsible for the AMA, the American Medical Association, and the education system in general? So I'm with you. All right.
How is Rockefeller responsible for the education system?
So educate, he created it. He basically created the education system that we have today. So Ben Franklin, go back to the day he was the first one to really create college, right?
Uh-huh.
It was higher education. But
Okay.
John D. Rockefeller is the one that really started to get involved into the Department of Education. And he's the one that started to put together the curriculum of how it was set up and structured. And so
But
then
a lot of that stuff has been was really local for a long time. The U.S. Are you talking about the U.S. Department of Education?
I can't say whenever the government really stepped in and started to make it so it's like no kid left behind. I think Bush was responsible for that, but
Hmm.
basically he's the one that put the curriculum together, helped structure it. And there's interviews
Hmm.
with him. You can look
Hmm.
this up. He said that on record, I am not trying to create a nation of thinkers. I want to create a nation of workers. And so he
Hmm.
structured the education system in a way
Hmm.
where it was going to make individuals workers rather than owners. And
Hmm.
you start to see the genesis of the education system. Combine
Hmm.
that with the AMA, with I don't know if you've ever looked into this, but how he created the pharmaceutical world and what he did in the very beginning. This isn't very conspiracy based because it's fact, right? You just look
Yeah.
on 1920, 1915, the whole world changed right around then. So look into it, but you start to realize, wait a second, what if this was all put in place to not create financial success and wealth and freedom? And why is it that we have all of these bells and whistles, and still kids are coming out in debt, struggling, mental issues, and you, like you said, with parents getting overwhelmed. Wait a second, if I have kids, it's only going to be more of a financial burden, and then whenever I hand them off to school, I want them to learn the education system or the financial system, but it's not even teaching them the right stuff. So there's this really broken loop, and I just think that there's an agenda at bay here, or
Hmm.
at the helm. So I guess you don't agree with my sentiment on that.
I don't think there's really an agenda, but I wish I could have a longer conversation with you. After I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, maybe I'll reach back out.
You are
Um,
gonna really thank me on that, just so you
yeah,
know.
I will. I love passionate book recommendations. Yeah, I have a less. I share. I don't think our K-12 system is perfect. I went through it. I went to public schools. You went to public schools, right?
Yeah, public school, went to public school,
Yeah.
and
I had all kinds of teachers. I had some teachers who were so inspiring and worked so hard and poured their heart into this job and absolutely encouraged independent thinking and challenging authority and furthering your own goals creatively. I had some teachers totally like that who are the exact opposite of the mentality that you're describing. And some of these teachers were really consummate professionals. I think they could have been extremely successful in the private sector. They could have been good entrepreneurs, and they were public school teachers. And I loved that, and I benefited from that enormously. And I had other teachers who were there to get a paycheck and were really happy they had, a safe job where they didn't have to do a good job and they didn't have to put their heart into it. There's a book I like. Um, I think it might be called How the Other Half Learns, about describing some of the charter schools in New York, and he talks about the gas factor. Can I
oh, tell
curse
me
on your
about this.
podcast?
Tell me about
Can I
this.
curse on your?
Yeah, of course. Hell
Okay.
yeah.
Gas stands for give a shit. So he talks about the gas factor with teachers, the give a shit factor, and he he just observing some of public school classrooms. there are some teachers who don't have the gas factor. They're phoning it in. And that's part of our public school system. I don't think that's the dominant part of our public school system. And I don't think that's a conspiracy to deaden the brains of American children. Sorry, I shouldn't use the word conspiracy. I don't mean that. That sounds like I'm dismissing your perspective, and I'm not. So I'll
No,
stop using that. I'll stop.
no,
I'll stop using that
please,
word.
many people come on this podcast. Some agree with me, some don't. I just love talking to people. So you can say whatever you want.
It's clear. No, you're a pleasure to chat with. Um, yeah, so I think the public school system is a mixed bag. It's not perfect, um, but overall, I think it's a huge asset to our country, and steps we could take to improve it would be valuable. And I think part of why it struggles, especially in working class communities, is because we actually don't have enough um, public school type opportunities for kids in those communities. So if kids show up at age 5, having spent the first 5 years of their life when their brain is developing, kind of watching quite a bit of TV, spending quite a bit of time on the iPad or the phone, or um, not really getting spoken to a lot because their parents are busy worrying about the bills, worrying about their jobs, worrying about divorce and, you know, mental health problems and all the the stuff that adults deal with. If those kids are not getting the kinds of enrichment opportunities that they could get, and then they show up at school at age 5, suddenly those public school teachers in those communities have much harder jobs on their hands,
Hmm.
and the deck is really stacked against them. And I think we wind up blaming those teachers, but really it's kind of all of our fault collectively for letting lower income kids on average have such vastly weaker opportunities for the first 5 years of their life. When lower income kids show up at school, they're already massively behind upper middle class kids. At the first day of our free American public school system, we have let lower income kids fall dramatically behind. And so to me, it's the a lot of the shortcomings of our public schools are really clustered in places that have fewer resources. The parents didn't go to college as often. The parents didn't find good careers that were not around college, in plumbing and electricity and um, health. A lot of health jobs don't necessarily require a college degree. There's a lot of ways that communities can get more resources, but communities that don't find those paths, um, the public schools have much harder jobs. And I think we unfairly blame those public schools when those kids don't graduate from high school, or those kids don't go to college, or those kids have to go to a lower quality college that is often like a for-profit college that might, in many cases, be a ripoff to make money for a corporation.
Hmm.
Instead, those kids could be graduating high school with, good grades, good test scores, good writing skills, good social and emotional skills to handle conflict and to handle um, challenges and to persevere. Those are skills that public schools can build if they have, if they're not dealing with kids who are facing nutrition problems and mental health problems and um, the kinds of problems that when we leave 90% of childhood to individual parents are kind of inevitable in communities with fewer resources. So to me, yeah, I don't have as hostile a view toward our public school system. I think it's kind of unfairly blamed for the bigger collective choices that we've made.
Yeah, I like how you said hostile. I think teachers are great, by the way. Really, I think so. And I know a lot of teachers. We worked with them. The system itself, the board, I think, are to blame. And I think whoever is funding the board is to blame, right?
The
Because
board, the
tech,
board, what is the board?
the board, if you go to any school, they like I know a teacher that tries to talk about like this book,
Okay.
and the board will shut them down. You're not allowed to talk about this book. Like,
Oh,
so if you read this book and you learn it and you love it and you're
yeah,
like, man, I really want to put this in the local school, try. I want to let you say, just try to talk to the board that's going to try to approve this into the curriculum. They will
yeah.
fight you tooth and nail, in my opinion. Anyways, I want to get
Really
to
interesting.
building scales, okay? Or building
Yeah.
skills.
Yeah,
So you
great.
talk about this, and I think it's crucial. In my opinion, the way you build skills is exactly what you said. Build their emotional control, the emotional
Yeah.
muscle, but also their
Yeah.
ability to read and write. Writing and reading, that makes you dangerous, right? It gives you
Yeah.
individual thought. And in my opinion, the phrase that I live by and I teach it within my company is think like an entrepreneur. Once you
Hmm.
realize that, oh, you are in control of your destiny, every shape and form of your destiny. If you think like an entrepreneur, you realize there's wherever there's chaos, there's opportunity. If somebody's in pain and I provide a solution to get them from one point to another, I could reap benefits individually. So I need to
Yeah.
lead with service first, but also I need to articulate my solutions. I need to defend myself, and I need to have the backbone whenever somebody criticizes me to fight back. So thinking like an entrepreneur is an absolute game changer. In my opinion, if we were to change the world, give people an incentive to start a business in school. Let them learn the way. That's my
Hmm.
philosophy. So, what would you say when it comes to building skills? What's your remedy?
Um, well, I love what you're saying. I do think the curriculum in our public school system could incorporate, in some cases, more of this, you know, here's how you go off and you identify and solve a freaking problem. I think
Yes.
there's room for more of that in our curriculum. I think it is challenging partly because so many kids enter school and progress through school falling behind on some more basic skills like reading and writing and basic numerical literacy. And when you have kids who are struggling to stay on track for these basic skills, I'm not sure that I think what would really help is tutoring and smaller classes and more supplemental. What would really help is what I really think would help is family care. Okay, Mike. Actually, I'll just cut to the point.
All
In
right.
my book, in my book, I feel like old people get Medicare and Social Security. Okay, and it doesn't seem like a giant infringement of individual liberty because Social Security is just mailing some checks to people so that they can live with dignity in retirement, and Medicare is subsidizing the private sector and the nonprofit sector, hospitals, physicians, nurses, all those occupations. That whole industry rests on the backbone of Medicare and Medicaid, which is collective resources shoveled into the health industry. And those are not perfect programs, but together that means old people get their main problems substantially, not perfectly, but significantly addressed. The main problems of old age are health and poverty. We have invested hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars to acknowledge and start chipping away at those problems. I think child development is the same magnitude of a challenge. And I don't think there's a quick fix. I think we need to invest in, I call it family care to try to get people thinking about childhood the way that we think about old age in America, where we need large collective investments on the scale of hundreds of billions of dollars. And giving kids access to Rich Dad, Poor Dad, as awesome as a book it probably is, it's sort of like giving old people access to a book about healthcare. Like, no matter how good that book is, they're not going to have $20,000 to get a shoulder replacement. It won't happen unless society subsidizes health insurance and makes it available to all people. And so I think what would really address the problem of working class kids growing up to have less fulfilling careers, less stable families, higher rates of crime, and lower incomes and worse rates of mental health, what would really address that monumental anti-American situation is much larger collective investments in childhood opportunity. And it could happen. It could be, it should, could and should be decentralized. It should be, hey, you're a parent, you now get the option to go to a local childcare center of your choosing as long as it meets certain requirements. And that might be at a church. It might be at a local Christian church, Catholic church, Jewish temple, uh, uh, a mosque. It might, as long as it's a good institution, you could go to a childcare center there. Your kid is going to have access to summer and extracurricular opportunities after school during summer break. Your kid is going to have access to tutors, which are a very expensive resource, but are really worthwhile from a taxpayer standpoint, because it gets kids to build these skills that help them contribute more as adults. These are expensive, complicated solutions, but I feel like that is really what is needed to address the core problem of unequal opportunity in our country.
So, one of the last questions I have for you when it comes to the family itself. So, you're talking about the school system, more money, right? Bigger, I guess you could say, packages for programs to offer more services to kids.
Yes.
You're saying that's
Yes.
the main solution. What
Yes.
about the individual responsibility of the parent, maybe a stay-at-home parent? Do you think this is part of it? I believe one of the reasons why I love going over to see my dad and going to the house still is it brings back many great memories of sitting around the plate with everybody and having family memories. So we went to church together, right? And so we would come back Saturday night dinners and all that. And so I think maybe there's a family issue that's broken in society, right? The two family household, but also the fact of maybe spirituality is on a decline. Maybe family culture is just completely crushed. Maybe there isn't the mom and dad of the past that is in today's world, where now they're so focused on their careers, they're not spending time with their kids and showing them how important it is to get around the dinner table at 6 o'clock, say your prayers, eat your food, and just stick together as a family. Do you think that's part of it, or what are your thoughts on that?
I wish I wish more people were getting and staying married. I think I grew up with two parents. My parents did get divorced when I was a teenager, but they co-parented very graciously and generously and maturely. And I really it is sad that so many kids grow up with just one parent. That's not good. I think that's largely a reflection of inequality, and a lot of people want to have stable families and be there for their kids, and it's just very challenging, more challenging than it used to. I don't think that's a decline in virtue in our great republic. I think it's an economic phenomenon where working class communities have really struggled because their job opportunities have declined over the last half century. Um, I also think, of course, individuals can do things. Individuals, I don't mean to imply that individuals are these helpless people at the whim of government intervention. I think if you look at it from a different angle, let's look at old people, elderly people over 65. Is it better if their kids help take care of them? Is it better if you're there for your dad
Yeah,
and you keep you help him with his health problems, you help him with his mental health problems, you have dinner with him as often as you can. Family closeness is probably really good for your dad.
yeah, of
But
course.
do you think that is a good substitute for Medicare and Social Security? Those
I,
seem
I
like
think he needs me and my brother hanging around the
uh-huh.
house, maybe a dog, than what the government will do for him, in my opinion, right? So I think what will keep him alive is if I go over and visit him and make sure he's drinking his water and family time over
Yeah.
the pills. Now, I will say there's certain things that he needs medically that
Yeah.
is great, and the medical system's amazing. But do
Yeah.
they do more harm than good sometimes? Absolutely.
Oh, okay. Well, longer conversation, but Social Security is just money. Hopefully that's helping your dad. And I don't know. I mean, if he's getting $20,000, $30,000 a year of Social Security, um, that seems very valuable to keep him out of poverty. And it would be hard for you and your brother generally to provide that kind of financial security. Some people would. Some families did make sure their parents had enough resources in old age, but historically, the result of not having Social Security was just that old people lived in dire poverty. And what has happened since the rise of Social Security is elderly poverty has dramatically declined. So it's not like it was replacing resources of families. Um, and I think same with Medicare. It used to be the case that lower income people just didn't have access to the kinds of high quality care that higher income people did. I share a lot of your concerns, by the way, that the US medical system and pharmaceutical system are not working in the best interests of people's health.
Yeah,
That's a longer conversation.
correct.
But I think if you talk to old people, they do generally feel very grateful that they have access to modern health to the extent they choose to use it. And um, that is a very expensive program to give
Mhm.
everybody access to that kind of healthcare system. It's Medicare. And I feel like I kind of agree with you that family closeness is a really powerful thing and should be encouraged. But I think we don't necessarily have great policy tools for some of that stuff. We haven't found a program that increases marriage rates in a durable way. And even if that stuff is struggling, we have found a lot that doesn't stop tutoring from working. and it doesn't stop good after school and summer and childcare programs from working. We can work on both of these things, but I don't think it serves the best interest of children to deny them the highly effective opportunities that we have already discovered that are expensive but extremely valuable and wind up paying taxpayers back for their investment over time when the kids grow up to have better careers. I don't think we should really wait on making those investments until we find direct interventions that improve family stability and closeness. And if we do make the other direct investments in kids and they grow up to have more stable, successful, fulfilling careers, they will also have more stable families, and they will also be more, stable pillars of their community that are more likely to participate in things like church and youth sports programs and nonprofit organizations. So I think there's not really a reason we can do both, you know?
Sounds like one of the biggest concerns you have is just the financial issue, right? So when it comes to investment for whenever they're older, even when they're younger, but if everybody has the mentality to get rich, right? Is that a bad thing? It's to get wealthy, to get free. And I know you said in the very beginning that if somebody makes that much money, there's probably some evil intent. And we could always
For
argue on that. But um, when it, we're, you can't condemn something that you should want for everybody, right? When it comes for people getting wealthy and free and financially set, so they don't need a government or a program to take care of them, they're totally independent. So do you
Absolutely.
preach get rich, get free, get independent? Because that's what I share a lot of.
Yes, I do to the with some caveats, I also agree with people like artists and teachers who are not trying to get rich. They have other goals, and I don't think that's dumb. I don't think they're chumps.
No.
So
But
I
what if you're a
think
teacher and you teach your kids, but also understand, well, if I take 20% and invest in real estate, that's good. Oh, wait a second, I get these tax advantages as a real estate investor. Oh my
I love
God.
it.
You know,
I love
so
it.
that's good, right?
Yeah, 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 absolutely. I think a nation of hustlers is wonderful. I love that part of our culture. I think it's good to encourage it. I think, pursuing wealth, in a way that is responsible and doesn't become greed and lose sight of more important things. I think that's a great virtue and a value that um, I don't mean to diminish that in any way. I think it's great. I think it's not, I think a lot of kids can't, I think that cultural push that you're contributing is awesome. And I don't think it will make a big difference I don't think it'll make as big a difference in the lives of lower income kids as you might hope because they're just starting the public education system so far behind. Like a 4-year old is not going to benefit from, yes, there's some independent part of teaching a 4-year-old, but a 4-year-old is not going to read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. A 4-year-old has to know how to read and think. And that they're already really a lot of kids in our stratified society are already behind and won't necessarily get to the point where they can read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, decide for themselves whether or not it is sound advice or snake oil. Because for every Rich Dad, Poor Dad, there's 99 snake oil books that are just
Yeah.
as sexy and persuasive and promise just as much benefit. It takes a lot of skill development for a kid to get to the point and hear the kind of message that you're preaching and benefit from it. And I think we need bigger investments to get more kids to that point where they can benefit from this kind of, I think you don't quite realize how sophisticated the messages that you're preaching. It requires a pretty large foundation of pre-existing skills for people to really capitalize on it.
Yeah.
Like if you, I don't know, if investing in real estate is a big part of financial independence, oh my God, good luck to somebody without a lot of financial savvy going into the world and saying, hey, everyone, I want to invest in real estate. You're going to have your heart eaten alive by that industry if you don't really know what you're doing?
Oh, that's an entrepreneurship in general. You're going to get beat up. You're going to get
Yeah.
kicked around. You're going to get spit on, but also you're going to become a formidable individual as time goes on. So you just got to stick with it, in my opinion. There's a
Yeah.
phrase that I live by, never say die from the Goonies coming out. I have a new book coming out. It's called Never Say Die, but I'm glad I
Nice.
was able to plug that. Anyways, I believe in the phrase, a great teacher, a great teacher shows you where to look, not what to see. And I think that it's in the best interest of the world if you give people certain ways of looking at whether it's entrepreneurship or financial, development, give them, the resources necessary, a full spectrum, not just the specific books that they're teaching in school when it comes to these fiction books, right? Great books, Hemingway, phenomenal, but it doesn't help people become financially free. And I think if you just add this into the curriculum, it could change everything. And then the last thing I want to say is after analyzing some of the top richest families in the world, I realized that there's two things. I work with many people, top 1%, and they homeschool their kids. They're not sending their kids to public school. But
Mm,
and then the other part of it is the real wealthy, talk about the Bezoses and all these, the top 1% of the 1%. They're
yeah.
telling their kids to go to liberal arts school, not for the job that they're going to get, to learn how to read and to write. And if you
Hmm.
can read and write, you can communicate, and that's what's going to make you dangerous in anything because they don't have to worry about a job, right? They already have the money, they have the opportunities. If you can become a great communicator, you can win in life. So, in my opinion, one of the things that you can really educate a kid on that will never die is learn to read and write higher than the next person. And I don't think they're doing that in school nowadays. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. But I just believe that when kids graduate from school, they have not fallen in love with reading. They have not fallen in love with writing blogs about their life and their journey. So I think they could do a better job in that aspect too. So,
Mm.
any last things you could say about the parent trap or maybe some changes we can make in the system?
Well, I've really enjoyed this discussion with you. I think we have different viewpoints, but it is such a pleasure to chat with you. And I'm going to follow up and read some of the stuff you recommended. The book that I wrote is called The Parent Trap: How to stop overloading parents and fix our inequality crisis. And I'm I'm trying to, do my small part to inspire a movement to have bigger public investments in kids. And that doesn't mean Big Brother taking over the life of parents. It means more money in the hands of local community teachers, childcare workers, nurses, counselors, tutors, soccer, basketball coaches. It's a very decentralized idea. And I hope some of your listeners for whom your ethos of personal responsibility and individual freedom, for whom that resonates, and it's a wonderful message. I hope they check out my book as well, and I hope they find it thought-provoking, even if they don't agree with everything in it, and makes them a little more open to taxpayers, taking a little more collective responsibility for our nation's children. And if that happens, then I think future generations will benefit. So anyway, my website is natehilger.com. My book is The Parent Trap, and it's been so nice chatting with you, Mike. Thanks for hosting me on your show. It's been a
Man,
real
yeah,
honor and a
your
pleasure.
book is doing really well. 43 ratings, 4.7 stars on Amazon. And obviously, yeah, we don't agree on everything, but we do agree that there is an inequality crisis. I do believe. And if there's anything that I've seen in the past couple of years, it's almost like there are two worlds out there. And once you
Hmm.
wake up, it's very much like the movie The Matrix. You know what I mean? You get the pill, blue pill. You start to
Hmm.
realize, oh my God, there are two worlds. And
It's
once you
like, I
wake
think,
up,
yeah.
you start to realize how maybe the wealthy are thinking and they're completely different than what the average person is thinking. So that's all
Hmm.
I'm saying. But there is definitely an inequality crisis. However it gets solved, it's all matters. So guys, pick
Let's
up The
help
Parent
kids.
Trap.
Let's help kids. Let's just make kids richer so that the poor kids
Yes,
grow up to be just as rich as the rich kids, and then we won't have as much of an inequality crisis.
Nate, we're starting to agree. Yes, get
All right.
rich, get free, never say die. Nate
Yep.
Hilger, thank you so much for being here. It has been an honor to talk with you, man. I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks so much, Mike. Have a great day. Bye.
Remember, guys, $1 million book will lead to $1 million life. Right on.